So we run these meetings every month, and I usually pick a topic that's relevant. And when I started thinking about this, we were still thinking that maybe we could pass a budget reconciliation plan that would include the climate aspects of the Build Back Better or some version of it. And then, of course, Mr. Manchin came through with no, thank you, I'm not interested. We're going to wait a little bit while longer. So that probably throws a monkey wrench into all the things that we're doing. But with the Supreme Court ruling and all of the other things that are happening, we need to be active. We need to be proactive. We need to be talking to people and trying to convince people about what actually could happen even in the legislature or the president or whatever. So I put this out for anybody to ask if somebody could talk about what could happen in terms of the budget. It's a little dated now. And the Reverend Mitchell Hescox responded. He's the co-author with Paul Douglas of Caring for Creation, the Evangelical's Guide to Climate Change in a Healthy Environment. And he's also president and CEO of the Evangelical Environmental Network. So I think he's a great person to be talking to a interfaith group, which is a combined group between Interfaith Power and between the Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light, and also the Jewish Earth Alliance. But before Mitch gets started, Amani, who we all know because she runs this meeting for us on a regular basis, sends out announcements and everything else, has volunteered to give our inspirational speech. So, and she also has a few announcements. So Amani, take it away, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Phyllis. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us on this hot day. I'm going to start us off with the faith reflection, specifically on just perseverance in general. So I hope it resonates with you all. It's called Don't Worry by William Author Dunkerley. And after that, I'll give a few short updates and then turn things back over. Just do your best and leave the rest to him who gave you life, and zeal for labor and the joy of strife, and zest of love and all that lifts your soul above the lower things. Life's truest harvest is in what we would and strive our best for, not most in what we could. The things we count supreme stand haply, not so high in God's esteem as how and why. All-seeing sight cleaves through the husk of things, right to the roots and springs, sees all things whole, and measures less the body than the soul. All righteous right will weigh men's motives, not their deeds alone. End and beginning unto him are one, and would for could shall. Motives are seeds from which at times spring deeds, not equal to the soul's outreaching hope. Strive for the stars. Count not well done but best, then with brave patience leave the rest to him who knows. And that is called Don't Worry by William Author Dunkerley. As far as announcements, I'm sure you all are aware, the Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light is having a press-related event outside of the EPA office tomorrow at 2 p.m. We do understand that it is going to be hot tomorrow, and the city just put an announcement out regarding that. But we'll actually be under some shade tomorrow, and we're going to keep this event no more than 45 minutes, and we will be providing water and refreshments. But this is going to be a rally following the Supreme Court's decision limiting the EPA's being able to set standards, as Phyllis mentioned. And we're calling it Health Solutions to Pollutions. We're going to have Councilmember Helen Gim, Clean Air Council, the Physicians for Social Responsibility, and a few other speakers at the event at 2 o'clock. If anyone's not familiar, I believe it's 1650 Arch Street, and I'll drop the registration in the chat. Of course, I understand it's going to be extremely hot, so if it's not something you're comfortable with, I completely understand. And if possible, we're looking to take action as well through letter writing. specifically the organizations like the EPA and then also the White House, Faith Office, the Department of Interior. We're looking to write letters to urge them to fund climate solutions and provide funding for climate solutions in the 2023 budget. I'm going to drop a sample letter, which is actually from the Joseph Earth Alliance, and then there's one from Pennsylvania Interfaith Light. You can choose whatever one you're comfortable with, and make things in your own words as appropriate. And we just ask if you do write any letters, if you could send them to myself or David Menendez, our executive director, and I'll put our emails in the chat as well. Anyone has any questions? You can just let me know in the chat. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Amani, for double duty, giving us an inspirational speech, as well as reminding us about a really important action tomorrow in Philly, if people can make it. And there's going to be many more actions coming up. I know people are talking about actions in the beginning of August in Philly and Pittsburgh and other places. So I think we're all going to be leaving the comfort of our Zoom screens and going to start coming in person to be doing more actions. Hopefully they will not be arrestable actions, but more civil disobedience, and feel safe enough to come. So Mitch, I gave you probably an impossible job as the situations keep changing day to day, but I know you're up to the task because I've heard you at meetings and I know how well informed you are. So I personally look forward to learning from you, and you can talk for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll ask questions. And knowing the people on this call, they will ask you great questions. So welcome and thank you very much.
Sure, it's glad to be here and share a little bit of whatever knowledge I do have. Just a little background, the Evangelical Environmental Network's been around since 1993. We operate both nationally, and right now we're really engaged quite heavily in really 5 states: Colorado, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, and Georgia. So we do both state and federal level work, and I like to jokingly say that I spend half my time in Washington, half my time in Harrisburg, and half my time traveling around the country speaking at local churches. So, and that's not quite as true anymore with the COVID days, but before COVID, it certainly was. So, I've been blessed that I've done a lot of work in policy over the years, both in Harrisburg, but especially in DC. EEN and I personally did, a lot of the bang up work on the mercury and air toxic standard, the original methane standards, a whole bunch of things. So I've been blessed to be part of that. But the couple of things I'd like to start out with, and maybe it's just to revisit real briefly, is, West Virginia versus the EPA. And I wrote a blog about it, the day it came out, and I appropriately called it, because I love old movies, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the good part is they did not take away the endangerment finding that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. What the bad is, and part of this major doctrines role that they're playing with, which could have even longer effects, but they said something that, quite honestly, EPA knew all along since 2015 was problematic, and that was setting guidelines outside the fence line. And that's the term for it, of basically just waiting for, not an individual plant basis. And everybody could tell you, from Gina McCarthy to Janet McCabe on down, that they knew that they were on questionable legal footing. The bad news is that it really does face, and the ugly part of it is that Congress is going to have to act sooner or later. And, we saw what the president did today in sort of a punt. If you followed the president's announcement up in Massachusetts, where he did announce a couple things of offshore wind farm and some heating and cooling things, and, a bunch of really good things, but not significant things, in my opinion. And we all know Joe Manchin's story, what we heard last week, but and one of the reasons the president did not announce more was there is still about this much hope for Joe Manchin coming through. And I tell you that I do speak to his staff at least a couple times a week. They're pushing him for it. It's not going to be the $550 billion thing if it comes through, but it's going to be closer to 300 billion if it happens. But one of the things that I'm holding out for is one of the pieces of legislation that's been incorporated into the reconciliation package is a bill that Manchin and Stabenow wrote a couple years ago regarding advanced manufacturing tax credit, or 48Q. He needs that to help turn former coal plants in West Virginia to get the significant tax breaks industry needs to rebuild West Virginia. It's why he championed it. It's why he's part of it. And I can just about tell you that there's no way it's probably going to happen unless reconciliation happens, because nobody's going to give, in the Democratic Party at least, nobody's going to support Mr. Manchin getting his one single thing that he really, really wants if nobody else gets anything. So that's why I have a little bit of optimism that something could happen. I mean, hopefully all of you are praying people, and I'll let you do all you can to pray, because I think we need that. If you know any good Catholic people that live in West Virginia, have them call Mr. Manchin, or my tribe. He wants to hear from conservatives, and that's what we need to do to keep pushing him and hearing that. That said, the budget process is going to take a long time this year, and I don't expect the budget to go through until a continuing resolution probably happens in December. My reason and logic being, this is an election year. You need 60 votes to get anything through the Senate, and the Senate's not going to do anything that they can until they know what the shape of the House is going to look like next year, and even the shape of the Senate. So I don't expect a whole lot of movement. There'll be some committee votes and some things passing through, but those are some things that I don't think are going to be really quick, immediate action. But there is something and a couple things we can do right now that I think are extremely important. The first one is coming sometime out of the EPA in the next month over to the White House. The Office of Management and Budget is going to be the new and existing source methane rules for sealing up leaks from existing and new oil and gas wells and infrastructure. That it's almost done. I talk to EPA pretty regularly on that rule, because I helped start writing it back in 2016 when it came out the first time. So the drafts are all done. Some of the things that are in there that we really are pushing for is the first go round did not have provisions to monitor and to adequately address leaks from low producing oil and gas wells. And they are the wells that leak the most. They produce only about 3 or 4% of natural gas and oil in the United States, but they are worth about 40 or 50% of the actual leaks. The problem with it, I think it's called a supplemental rule because this is the second finding that they're going to come out with in the next month in August. But here's where I think you need to help. If you want to send, they've already taken their comments. If you want to organize meetings from your team with EPA, you can, Phyllis can email me later and I will supply you the name, but the director of outreach at EPA is a woman by the name of Rosemary Ekabari. And Rosemary is the person to contact if you would like to arrange a meeting with EPA officials, starting with her or other people, to say, hey, look, we want these rules out the door, and we want you to address low producing wells. Especially, we want you to include flaring in there, because if flaring is not a problem for Pennsylvania. The low producing wells are. In fact, the majority of Pennsylvania's wells are low producing wells. And if you also have been reading the papers, or an op-ed I wrote this week, is the Pennsylvania legislature just gave the conventional drilling company about $3 billion in they've refused to allow Pennsylvania's DEP to increase bonding requirements on all these small wells. And the maximum bond rate you can charge now is $2,000 a well, and the cost to remediate a well, to plug it and take care of the stuff, is generally about $70,000 a well. Plus the wells that were drilled before 1985 have no bonding through it. So if you add up all the numbers, you know, if a gas company is going to be faced with, you know, paying a bonding, walking away from a bond of $2,000 or nothing, and charge you, instead of fixing a well for $70,000, guess what they're going to do? It's not a secret. But in any event, back to EPA. Call Rosemary, email Rosemary, get a meeting if you want to. I think they're pretty well along with it, but here's the next step that's going to take place, is that are you familiar with the EPA process of what happens after they write a rule? It then goes to the White House, to the Office of Management and Budget, a subdivision called OIRA, O-I-R-A, and I always forget what it is, Office of Information and Regulatory something or other. But they actually review the numbers, the financial costs of it, EPA's calculations. But one of the interesting things about the Office of Management and Budget and this other entity within it is they are controlled by the White House. There is a lot of speculation from people like me, because of people in the oil and gas industry crying foul before the midterm elections, that the White House will not release this regulation until after the midterms are over, which will delay the whole thing another, really, in reality, 6 to 8 months. So again, Phyllis is part of things. Other people, I can tell you when that rule goes over to the Office of Management and Budget, and I would urge you to set meetings with them or write letters to them saying, we want this rule out the door now. You know, for me, I do it for children's health. That's the number one thing that is going, because if you don't know, you know, 25% of climate change gases, greenhouse gases, come from leaking methane in the United States. And also, methane is 86 times more potent greenhouse gas in the first 20 years. So the biggest, literally, most effective, most efficient way of starting to reduce greenhouse gases is to seal leaks in our methane/natural gas infrastructure. And for those of you who, if I don't know if anybody lives in Philadelphia, you know, not only does the wells leak and the pipes leak, I know that Philadelphia Gas Works has lots of gas leaks. And so you could be working on very strongly on local government and Philadelphia Gas Works to seal up their own leaks, which are significant. So that's the first thing that I'd like to recommend to you, is to really get engaged on that methane rule and make sure it happens. But back to the EPA, and one of the things you can talk to Rosemary about, and I can send you some notes on this. There's also several more rules that are now pending at EPA. The next one, hopefully out the door, is going to be the clean truck rule, which is going to force the reduction of nitrous oxide and soot, PM 2.5 and PM 2.5, from heavy duty trucks and vehicles. PM 2.5 alone is one of the most deadly known pollutants there are. It's now leaked from everything from dementia to certainly to preterm births in women who are pregnant, to around the country, responsible for at least 5,000 premature deaths of children, let alone 200,000 deaths of all people in the United States. It is a significant rule that will face a lot of pushback from the trucking industry, from the diesel people, from everybody, because it essentially will force the trucking industry to start moving towards all electric vehicles. All electric vehicles are probably the second biggest thing we can do to get rid of both pollutants and greenhouse gases in Pennsylvania. If you live in the inner city, you know the potent Lancaster County, right next to me, still has one of the highest PM 2.5 rates in the country because of its both large farming and large transportation infrastructure. So work on, when we talk to Rosemary, also we need to press them to get that rule finished and out the door. Also, there is going to be the an ozone rule, the cross-state ozone rule coming out, needs to be out. There's going to be a coal ash rule. There's a whole series of regulations that EPA is working on right now that need to be expedited to get them done, to get them written, to get them commented upon, to get them promulgated, put into effect before the Biden administration leaves. So that's really only 2 years to accomplish about 6 rules, and the biggest one being the Clean Power Plan 2, which will be the revision to the Clean Power Plan, looking at things only inside the fence line of power plants. So for me, the biggest short-term thing is working on EPA and getting these things done. Because I personally don't believe that, I mean, I still think there's a little, as I mentioned earlier, tiny hope for Joe Manchin, but I don't believe the president is going to call a climate emergency, at least not before the midterm elections. There's too much politically at stake for members of Congress for him to do that. Because if he does things like stop exports of petroleum products around the world, Europe's going to be mad at it. Plus, it will probably reduce, in some cases, it will instantaneously sort of lower the price, but then oil and gas companies will quit drilling and quit turning their pumps on, which will raise the price back up. And it will cause a lot of people that have angst over the price of gas to go crazy, and which will affect the election. Because we know that most people in the United States vote on what's happening instantaneously and not looking at a long-term view, unfortunately. So that's why I don't expect him to do that. The other thing that I would strongly urge you, and this is a long-term thing, the immediate stuff I think is the EPA. I think that's the best thing. If you have any friends in West Virginia, again, call them Joe Manchin. But the other thing that I would start tracking and following, and especially if anybody lives in your group, lives in northwestern Pennsylvania, in the district of GT Glenn Thompson. He is currently the ranking member of the House Agriculture Committee. And if things go as anticipated, he will become the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee come January 1. Why that is so significant is we believe, and so do many others, that some of the biggest climate benefits that we can get in the next couple years are going to be through the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is going to start being worked on very heavily next year. There are all sorts of opportunities for natural climate solutions, for a whole slate of things that we can be working on that offer really high potential for working on reducing carbon, reducing greenhouse gases in general, and actually just being a really good thing to do. So I probably spoke more than 15 minutes, but that's the things that are happening in DC as we speak. Of course, the Senate wanted to have that reconciliation bill passed by August 5th, because that's when they all go on vacation. And you also know that, or I hope you know, that being that this is an election year, that after August, the only things that were going to be done will happen in September, which could be reconciliation and will probably be a budget, continuing resolution for the budget to get them through after the elections, because everybody in Congress is going out running for election, and 1/3 of the Senate is up for election. So they're all out knocking on doors and doing their election things, starting even more actively August 1st. So that's my synopsis of what I do and what we know about what's happening in DC. Hope it's been of some value to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. You were so informative. made everything clear and action oriented, which I like. I do hope you will send me, and then we'll send out to everybody, the contact information for Rosemary and for all the other people that you suggested that we speak to in the Office of Budget and Management.
Yeah.
This is a group that does get involved and get active, so.
I would make a suggestion, though, from talking to Rosemary and even at O&B. And O&B, they will come out when it's published in the register. They will say who the contact is for each individual bill because they differed. But because of Rosemary being the director of outreach for EPA, she gets a lot of emails. And what I would suggest you do is that you designate 1 or 2 people to email and suggest that you want to have a group meeting with her and others, because that's the best way you're going to get attention for hers, because she probably is not going to answer 20 different individual emails from a group. But if you say that you are, your coalition of people from Pennsylvania, you would like to arrange a meeting with her initially to talk about methane and ozone and the whole slate of things that are coming up, you'd be much more likely to get that meeting on a lot quicker basis than trying to do it individually, because they just don't have time to take individual meetings right now.
Meg?
Would you be, Mitch, would you be able to put in the chat that piece of legislation that is so important to Manchin in West Virginia, that is
Yeah.
sort of seems to be the big hook, at least for him?
It is, and what I'll do, because it's the IRS code is 48Q, but I will get you the actual name of the legislation that he wrote with Stabenow and put it in Phyllis, and she can forward it to you and do with all the details on it. Because I tend to talk in Washingtonese, and I don't remember the complete name of that bill, but I will get it for you. And Phyllis, I'll probably send it all to you out tomorrow morning if that's okay, and then you
That'd
can
be great,
forward it.
thank you. And then we'll forward it to everybody.
And if you could include a sentence or two as to what that does for Manchin in West Virginia, it enables, it opens all kinds of doors. I caught that, but I need a little
Yeah,
more
and
details. Yeah.
it just reiterating is basically what it allows to happen is, and what he's looking for, to take old coal mining sites and old power plants and turn those into advanced manufacturing sites.
Yeah.
And companies, to make that happen, he needs companies to get a huge tax break to move in and take over those places.
Well, I'm from Bethlehem, which has the largest Bethlehem steel. The area became the largest brown ground, if that's the term, in the country and maybe even in the world. So they ran with that approach, and it really did a lot of things. And I can see how it could really do a whole lot for West Virginia.
Yep, absolutely. So I will get those things, the 48Q, Rosemary's name, and those things out to you tomorrow morning.
Anybody here interested in getting together with a meeting with if I would so coordinated with Rosemary?
Sure.
Okay.
Definitely.
I have a question, and that is, what is so objectionable about that tax break from other places, other states?
There's not any objection to it. I mean, Stabenow is actually, from Michigan, it's actually for it too. But, if you haven't gathered by now, doing the right thing is not always what happens in Washington, D.C. It's all based on politics. And I think that an awful lot of people like White House and, most of the progressive Democratic senators will have a hard time voting for something that's going to give Manchin brownie points at home when he has stopped their thing that they wanted to happen for their homes and their districts and their areas. So that's why I say that I don't think 48Q will happen this Congress, that bill, unless it's in reconciliation, because he won't get the rest of the support from other senators to make it happen.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question?
I'm an ordained clergy person, and one of the things that I often tell people, and sometimes people think it's in jest, but and more often I think it's true, is that I part of my life is taking God and into up to Capitol Hill, because I said, the devil's already there, and it's very true in many cases.
If you have to trade horses to get something done, I mean, that's sometimes the only way to progress.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for giving us this information. You're on the ground there, and I think that's really, really important.
And I think, Washington, I think my blessing is two things that I learned a long time ago. I've been doing this now for 13 years. Before that, I was a local church pastor for 20 years. And before that, I was actually in the coal industry. But a friend of mine, who I'd known for a long time, who was then working for Bread for the World, told me, Mitch, the best thing you can do when you go to Capitol Hill is to remember that you are a pastor, and you treat people with respect and care, and you want the best for them, and basically to treat them like people and not means to an end. And I attribute my success and my friendships and my people that I know in Washington, D.C., because I treat them with respect, and I treat them as individuals. And, from my perspective, I offer to, and it doesn't matter your faith tradition, because I'm pretty generic, but I offer to pray for every staff member or member of Congress or administrative official I meet. And in 13 years, I've only had 3 people turn me down. And I think that's just, if we are people of faith, I think we need to represent our faith in the best tradition that we can. I'm a Christian, and I freely admit that I am an evangelical Christian, but I believe that, the Bible calls us to have justice and righteousness for everybody. And that's what my job is on the Hill in Washington. So Phyllis, I will get you things in the morning. Are there any other questions that I could answer before I go and have my dinner and spend some time with my wife?
The fact that you underscored the fact that people with faith can really have quite a bit of influence with their elected officials. And that's one of the reasons that it's so good that the people of faith come together and talk about these things. I think we can talk about it from our various faith perspectives, and people listen to us. They're oftentimes elected officials are also people of faith. So, and from what I understand, Mitch, there's an awful lot of people of faith who have very different points of view. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think there are accurate. I think in many instances, my own evangelical church has lost perspective on what the Bible really says. And that's one of my side passions, is to help my world see that, from my Christian perspective, a lot of my evangelical brothers and sisters think that salvation is the end of faith, being saved. And as I can very strenuously point out in the Bible, that's just the beginning of faith. And what you're saved for is what Paul wrote in Ephesians, that you're saved by grace, not because of your own doing, but because of who God is, but to do the works God has set before you. And essentially, we say that for me is building the kingdom of God. And so, allowing that, waiting, following Jesus until that comes back. So yes, there are people that believe differently, and people call me all sorts of names all the time. And, I've had, there's nothing that hasn't been said about me, from anything that I'm not a Christian to, I'm really just an earth worshiper, to everything else. So, you get used to it in the public sphere, but I know in my heart that I am a strong person of faith. And, I know how I believe in God and who I believe God is, and I'm willing to share that. But I also know that the most important thing about my faith tradition is what it says is that God is love. And anyone who doesn't love is not of God.
Thank you. Don't want to keep you from your dinner, so thank you for not only informing us, but also an inspirational message. And I knew I picked the right person. You were fabulous. Thank you.
Well, you're quite welcome, and I was glad I was able to help a little bit. So God bless all and have a good evening.
Thank you. So anybody want to raise any other issues, any other actions? Amani has talked about the action tomorrow with the EPA. Maybe you could just go over it again so that we know what the agenda is going to be.
Sure. So anyone that missed it, we're gonna have a press event rally in front of the EPA office on 1650 R Street tomorrow. I'll drop the link in the chat with more information. This will be regarding the Supreme Court's decision limiting the EPA from highly effective standards that we need in the states. We have Councilmember Helen Ginn attending. The Physicians for Social Responsibility will be in attendance and speaking. Also Russell Zerbo from Clean Air Council. We should have a representative from State Rep Malcolm Kenyatta's office. Yeah, we're gonna limit our time to about 30 to 45 minutes due to the heat. We will be under shade and we'll be providing water for the event, but we're looking to have food press. And the speakers that I mentioned that will specifically talk about the state and how the decision affects our state as a whole.
So if you're in the Philadelphia area, please try to make it and wear sunscreen and sun hat.
Yeah. But we will have water and things, and understand if anybody's not comfortable going, we completely understand.
What time is it?
It's at 2:00 p.m. Arthur. Yeah, it's 2:00 and it'll be done no later than like 2:45. I'll say at this point.
I will try to make it, but I can't make any promises.
Oh, no worries. Understood. Just dropped it in the chat, and if anyone has any other questions, there's my email as well.
Pat, Meg, Paul, anything else? Arthur, anything else that you would like to mention? Anything that's going on in your world that you think is worth sharing about this?
Well, one thought I had was that the Supreme Court has limited the EPA. I think I'm not sure exactly what they've limited the EPA to do, but it seems as though they've thrown a monkey wrench into the EPA, perhaps measuring CO2 output or pollution or whatever, that, and then having some power to enforce some of their rules regarding CO2 emissions. And the thought I had was they have some powerful tools to measure methane leaks, for instance. And you know, would it be worthwhile to try to encourage the Pennsylvania legislature to pass regulations saying that, or the Environmental Protection Agency, Pennsylvania has its own state environmental protection organization, and you know, could we say that they should be able to penalize a company that doesn't pay any attention to what the EPA has provided in its information?
Certainly the power is with the states right now, and some states are doing exactly what you're saying. I'm not terribly optimistic that the Pennsylvania legislature, given its present composition, will move in that direction. there is some hope that with the new redistricting, perhaps after the election, when the new legislature begins in January, perhaps some other things could take place. Anybody else have any thoughts about that?
I agree with what you just said, Phyllis, that I think the current composition of the legislature, if it changes a certain way, then maybe things could happen. I'm suspicious of what might happen now, but it is true. It seems like the state legislatures are the place where things are happening, and maybe it's worth just making more presence with the state legislature folks, period. Anyhow.
But Arthur, you also raised a point which I think is worth considering. Could we possibly put some pressure on the state EPA to be active? And I think the EPA can act independent of a legislation. I mean, they can start doing things such as monitoring and making people aware of it. So, I mean, I think that we probably need to start thinking about not just talking to our elected officials, because we either have people who are totally in our camp and they're wonderful, but they're also in the minority, or we have people who don't agree with us at all. And I just wonder whether EPA, just as he was saying, we should be meeting with Rosemary from EPA nationally, maybe meeting with EPA Pennsylvania-wide is a worthwhile thing to do. And especially since they have an office in Philly, it could be it could be an in-person type of meetings too.
Is that the national EPA organization in Philadelphia?
That is a national EPA. So I suspect the Pennsylvania EPA would be in Harrisburg. Pat, you look like you're ready to jump in.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, Pat. Go on.
I had a question about the rally. I'd love to be there, but I'm visiting my daughter who's had surgery. If it's recorded, is it possible to send me a copy of the recording?
I don't think it's, sorry, I don't think we're going to be recording it. We might record parts of it, and I know that we'll have a photographer. I can get back to you on that. I'm just not sure if the full event's going to be recorded, Pat.
Aww.
I can like double check with David.
It sounds like it's great.
Yeah, sorry. I'll just text David now and ask, but I really am not sure off the top of my head. So.
Well, good luck to your daughter tomorrow. Do you know whether the press is going to be there?
So I wish David was here to answer these questions. We kind of split our roles. Like I did the outreach as far as speakers and attendance, and he really handled the press. So I'm not specifically sure who's gonna be there press-wise tomorrow, but he's pretty responsive today. So let me text him and ask him now. As far as what specific press will be there.
Because it's possible if the press is there, we could get some coverage that way too.
Right, yeah, I'm just gonna confirm that now, and I'll get right back to you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Doesn't our organization have a recording camera?
I'm assuming so, but I'm just gonna kind of give this all to David because I'm not sure.
TSR should have somebody who can be doing that. They're a pretty sophisticated organization. Amani and I are also working on a possible action on August 5th or the following week. And that could be one in Philly, one in Pittsburgh. And that's to try to get some people aware of the fact that we really need to get some of these things passed. It's supposed to be pressuring the Senate, but I don't think that's going to be very helpful because we don't have the 60 votes. But that'll take place probably August 5th or the following week. And we're still in the process of forming that one. But be aware that we will be asking people to come to that.
Well, from what Mitch says, you tell me if I got it right, if we could do whatever, being someplace, communicating more the next couple weeks, because then it's just gonna become more and more the reelection piece
Mhm.
and harder for the politicians or whomever to quite be able to concentrate on any kind of topic.
Yeah,
So I think that's helpful information to kind of do that for, so if any people are doing, op-eds, letters, these meetings, events, if it could be done in the next couple weeks and
mhm.
more effort that way than closer to election,
Yeah, it was also disappointing to hear that the president would not be declaring a climate emergency before the midterm elections. So it's like we can try now, but we're probably not going to get much happening. And depending on the outcome of the elections, we could be working hard or we may be more frustrated. So to me, it always comes down to get the vote out, get the right people to come out and vote.
I can't remember which it is, and I should. It's either the American Medical Association or the American Pediatric Association. They're saying that it is a medical emergency, climate change.
I think a lot of groups are saying that. Unfortunately, it's a political thing also. And the president is already, his ratings are very, very low. And if the gas prices go up because of declaring it a climate emergency, then that is going to get people more upset with him and with the people in power. And I just worry that people are just going to blame the people in power and vote them out.
Yeah, you are right. It could have backfired terribly if he said,
And I think that's why Biden's not doing it.
yeah,
I mean, the same way that the most progressive parts of the Democratic Party are extremely upset with him because he hasn't acted the way he promised and he hasn't done anything. But he's a political animal, so he knows how to do these things. And, just because we want something, it doesn't necessarily happen. I mean, I personally think that $5 a gallon $5 a gallon gas is what we should be paying for, but that's fine for me to say that I drive an electric car. So
he also has the example, if we can remember, not too far in the past, in France, the Yellow Jacket folks, they went into a big uproar, and one of their big gripes was that they were doing more traveling and paying more for gas, and they felt the elite were doing less traveling for their living or whatever, and that there was a burden on them. So he has that example, how it really, affected top politicians with that. And that did happen. Yeah.
yeah. So Amani said that the event tomorrow will be recorded and that there'll be a photographer as well. So Pat, you'll be able to access it as well as you, Meg. Any other points anybody would like to raise? No. Thank you all for coming tonight in this hot night in the middle of the summer. I think the topic that we're going to talk about next month is the soot rules, and Mitch did mention it, the idea of the truck legislation with the nitrous oxide and the soot, the deadly pollution. I think that's going to be the topic that we're going to be talking about. It's not something that a number of people know a lot about, but that's what I'm thinking of. So everybody have a good night, and thank you all for coming, and stay cool, and good luck, Pat, to your daughter tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Hey.